Weddings are supposed to be about love, respect, and celebration. But when an elderly man stood up to speak, people rolled their eyes. They whispered, they laughed. They thought he had nothing important to say. But what no one expected was that his words would leave the entire room in stunned silence. And by the end of the night, even the most arrogant man was in tears. Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see wisdom and love forever. The wedding reception buzzed with energy, a kaleidoscope of laughter and music swirling around the elegantly decorated hall. George Whitman, a 75-year-old retired teacher, sat quietly at his table, a slight smile gracing his weathered face as he watched his granddaughter, Sophia, twirl joyfully on the dance floor. Her happiness filled the room, yet George felt a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. He had spent his life teaching and nurturing minds, but tonight he felt like a relic of a bygone era, overshadowed by the youthful exuberance surrounding him. As the festivities continued, George noticed Ryan Porter, the best man, preparing to take the stage. The young man was handsome and charismatic, embodying the confident spirit of the new generation. George couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy as Ryan captured the room's attention with his charm. "Let's give it up for the bride and groom," Ryan exclaimed, his voice booming over the sound system. The guests erupted in applause, and George's heart sank a little deeper. He could see Ryan's glances at him, a flicker of condescension in those bright eyes. "Isn't it great to see the old folks still come out to celebrate?" Ryan joked, eliciting laughter from the crowd. George's face flushed, and for a moment, he felt invisible. He had so much to offer, so many stories to tell, yet here he was, reduced to a punchline. He forced a smile, but the warmth in his heart began to feel like an ember smothered by the cool air of indifference. As Ryan continued with his anecdotes, George sat in silence, feeling the weight of his own inadequacy. But as the laughter echoed around him, he felt a flicker of resilience ignite within. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the lessons he had imparted to countless students over the years. This was his family, and he would not let a moment of ridicule define him. He would speak. He would be heard. "Just wait," he whispered to himself, determination hardening his resolve. With a slight adjustment of his tie, George prepared to stand. But just then, Ryan cracked another joke, this time aimed directly at him. "And let's hope George doesn't fall asleep during my speech, am I right?" The laughter that erupted was sharper, and George's smile faltered momentarily. But he held on to that breath, steeling himself for the moment that was about to unfold. George stood up, adjusting his suit with a slight tremor in his hands. The room, filled with laughter and chatter moments ago, fell into a hush as he approached the microphone. He cleared his throat, feeling the weight of all eyes on him, especially Ryan's, whose smug expression now seemed a bit less certain. George took a deep breath, summoning the warmth of memories from his own wedding day. "You know," he began, his voice steady yet soft, "when I married my dear Clara, I was just a young man full of dreams, much like Sophia and her new husband today." He paused, letting the nostalgic smile spread across his face. "We stood in front of our friends and family, just as you two are doing now, and promised to love and support each other through everything life would throw at us." As he spoke, George noticed Ryan shifting uncomfortably in his seat, a flicker of realization crossing his face. The guests, once skeptical, leaned in, intrigued by the sincerity in George's words. "Love isn't just about the grand gestures," he continued. "It's found in the little things. A shared cup of coffee in the morning, a hand held during a stormy night, or a simple, 'I love you,' whispered just before sleep." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she listened intently, her heart swelling with emotion. George looked directly at her, his gaze steady and filled with affection. "Sophia, my wish for you is that you cherish these moments, that you remember to laugh together and lean on each other when times get tough. Love is a journey, and every day is a new page in your story." The room was silent, save for the soft sniffles of guests moved by his heartfelt message. George's words resonated deeply, transforming the atmosphere from one of condescension to reverence. Ryan, who had once dismissed George's experience as irrelevant, now felt the weight of his earlier arrogance. The sincerity in George's voice was undeniable, and with each word he was crafting a legacy that transcended generations. The applause for George echoed warmly through the reception hall, wrapping around him like a soft embrace. Guests murmured among themselves, their expressions shifting from surprise to admiration as they processed the impact of his words. Ryan, the best man, sat in silence. The earlier smirk wiped from his face, his mind racing with thoughts of humility and regret. Olivia, Sophia's dear friend, was the first to break the spell. She approached George, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That was beautiful, Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You spoke from the heart, and it resonated with all of us. I think you've opened our eyes to so many things we overlook." George smiled, his heart swelling with warmth at her kind words. "Thank you, dear. It means a lot to me to know that my experiences can touch others. We often forget how important it is to connect across generations." "Exactly. I'd love to help bridge that gap," Olivia continued enthusiastically. "Maybe we could organize some gatherings where you can share more of your stories and wisdom. It would mean so much to everyone." "Now that sounds like a wonderful idea," George replied, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I would be thrilled to share and learn from all of you as well." As they spoke, Ryan, who had been sitting a few tables away, felt the weight of his earlier mockery pressing heavily on his shoulders. He stood up, glancing around the room, which had grown quiet in anticipation. Taking a deep breath, he made his way over to George, his heart pounding in his chest. "Have you ever heard words so powerful that they change the way you see life? That's exactly what happened at this wedding. If this story is touching your heart, hit the like button so more people can hear this incredible message. And tell me in the comments, what's the best advice about love or marriage you've ever heard?" The room held its breath, curiosity buzzing in the air. "Mr. Whitman," Ryan began, his tone earnest, "I need to apologize. I misjudged you, and I realize now how wrong I was. Your speech, it was profound and moving. I'm sorry for making light of what you shared." George looked at Ryan, his expression softening. "Thank you, Ryan. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. I appreciate your honesty." The tension in the air began to dissipate as the guests exchanged glances. Sensing a shift in the atmosphere, Ryan nodded, the weight of his earlier arrogance lifting just a bit. "I'd like to learn from this experience. I think we all could benefit from listening more and judging less." George smiled, his heart filled with hope. "That's the spirit, my boy. We all have something to learn from one another, regardless of age." Ryan stood, shifting his weight nervously as he faced George, who still radiated warmth despite the earlier tension. The room fell silent, the laughter and chatter fading into an expectant hush. "Mr. Whitman," Ryan began, his voice steadying, "I misjudged you. I didn't realize the depth of your words until now. They were profound." George smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Thank you, Ryan. We all have our moments of oversight. It's easy to underestimate what we don't understand." His tone was gentle, inviting, as if encouraging Ryan to see this not just as a moment of apology, but as an opportunity for growth. Ryan nodded, absorbing the wisdom. "I guess I thought that age meant being out of touch, but you've shown me that life experience is invaluable." The sincerity in his voice resonated with the guests, who began to murmur in agreement. With the atmosphere shifting, George decided to share a piece of his heart. "You know, my late wife Clara and I had a love built on patience and understanding. When we first got married, I was a young man filled with dreams, but life threw us some curveballs." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "What I learned was that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day. There were times we faced struggles, health issues, financial worries, but through it all, we chose to support each other." He glanced around the room, seeing several guests nodding, visibly moved by his vulnerability. "I remember one winter," he continued, his voice softening, "when we were both sick with the flu. We could barely get out of bed, but instead of succumbing to frustration, we turned it into our own adventure. We'd watch old movies, laugh at our ridiculous attempts to make soup, and share stories from our childhoods. Those moments, those simple joys, became the foundation of our love." Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes as she listened, her heart swelling with pride for the man who had raised her mother and now poured his wisdom into her new life. The room, once filled with skepticism, now buzzed with shared memories and reflections on love, bonding the guests together in a tapestry of experiences. As laughter and stories began to flow among the attendees, George felt a shift in the air. It was as though his words had opened a door to a deeper connection between the generations present. Inspired, people began to share their own tales of love, each story building on the last, turning the reception into a collective celebration of unity, understanding, and the transformative power of genuine connection. As the reception began to wind down, George Whitman found himself leaning against the bar, a soft smile gracing his weathered face. He watched with a sense of fulfillment as the younger guests animatedly discussed the speeches that had just unfolded. The laughter, the shared stories, and the rekindling of connections filled the air with warmth. Despite the noise, George felt a profound silence within himself, a renewed sense of purpose that had been absent for far too long. He realized he had finally bridged the gap he had felt between himself and the younger generation. In the corner, Sophia and Ryan stood in a hushed conversation, their expressions a mix of admiration and contemplation. "I can't believe how impactful Grandpa's words were," Sophia said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "He really knows how to touch people's hearts. I'm so proud of him." Ryan nodded, a newfound respect for George evident in his gaze. "Yeah, I underestimated him. I thought it would be just another old man speech, but he really spoke from the heart. It was refreshing." He paused, his brows slightly furrowed. "I guess I've got a lot to learn about appreciating the wisdom that comes with age." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with love for both her grandfather and the new understanding blossoming between her and Ryan. Just then, the lights flickered ominously, casting shadows that danced across the walls. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd as the reception hall was plunged into darkness. Gasps of surprise filled the air, a stark contrast to the earlier lighthearted atmosphere. "Everyone stay calm, it's probably just a quick outage," George called out, his voice steady and reassuring, cutting through the unease. He stood tall, the dim light revealing the strength of his character. "Let's not let a little darkness dampen our spirits. I have a story to share, one that I hope will keep our hearts warm." Guests turned toward him, their curiosity piqued. In the absence of the elaborate decorations and the music that had filled the room, George's voice became a beacon of comfort. He began recounting tales of resilience, love, and the enduring bonds that tie families together. The guests leaned in closer, hanging on to his every word, as the darkness around them faded into the background. In that moment, George felt the significance of what had transpired that day. The wedding was no longer just a celebration of love between Sophia and her partner. It had transformed into a tapestry of connections, revelations, and healing. The room, once divided by age and experience, was now united in shared stories and laughter, drawing everyone closer together as they navigated the uncertainty of the night. In the enveloping darkness, George felt an unexpected surge of clarity. The sudden silence of the room, punctuated only by the soft murmur of guests adjusting to the absence of light, gave him the perfect opportunity to connect with the audience on a deeper level. "Let me tell you a story," he began, his voice steady yet soothing, rising above the murmurs. "It's about resilience and hope." The guests leaned in closer, drawn to the warmth in his tone. "Many years ago, during a difficult winter, my wife and I faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We learned that love isn't just about the good times, it's about standing by one another through the storms." His words painted vivid images of resilience, and the crowd felt the weight of his experiences. Just as he reached the story's emotional peak, the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room. Gasps echoed as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with weary eyes and a hesitant smile. It was George's estranged son, David, who had left years ago under strained circumstances. The moment hung in the air, thick with disbelief and anticipation. "Dad," David's voice quivered, breaking the tension. "I've been listening." The audience remained frozen, caught between the surprise and the gravity of the moment. George's heart raced, a tumult of joy and apprehension swirling within him. He hadn't seen David in years, and the memories of their last encounter flooded back. "I've changed, Dad," David continued, stepping forward. "Your words tonight about love and forgiveness, they struck a chord in me. I've realized how important family is. I want to mend what's broken." Tears glistened in George's eyes as he searched his son's face, recognizing the sincerity etched in his features. The air in the room shifted dramatically as guests began to move closer, witnessing this raw moment of vulnerability. George took a step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "I've missed you, son." With that simple acknowledgement, the barriers that had long stood between them began to crumble. David closed the distance, enveloping his father in a heartfelt embrace. As the guests looked on, tears flowed freely, and the atmosphere transformed into one of collective healing. The wedding was no longer just a celebration of love between Sophia and her new husband. It had become a powerful reminder of the transformative nature of heartfelt words and the importance of forgiveness. The evening would be remembered, not just for the union of two people, but for the rekindling of familial bonds that had long been overshadowed by pain and misunderstanding. The room buzzed with emotion, and amidst the tears and laughter, a new chapter began for George and his family. Words have power, and sometimes the wisdom of the past is exactly what we need for the future. If you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a lesson that could change your perspective. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, Share this video with them. Let's remind the world that true love isn't about money or grand gestures. It's about choosing each other every single day.